And it says we are now live, just like that. We are live on, yeah, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, my personal page, my regular company page. And hi, everyone. It's Faye. It is Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I've been doing this, going live with my friends, my colleagues, my mentors, people I absolutely love and adore in my network for the past few months. And I am totally addicted. So today, I invite Josh Jackson to join me. And by the way, Josh, you go. We talked about this before. Josh is okay for you.
Josh is
Josh,
great. That's great.
Josh is great. So yeah, so Josh and I met in at actually Hastings and Hudson during one of Seth Godin's live event with 300 other people. I remember Josh being on stage, and I remember your face, kind of you're wearing a very serious suit and all that, like very well put together. And so I had a lot of assumptions. And then seeing you again during, I believe, because Seth Godin's releasing a new book. So I saw you in that group, reach out to you, and we're connecting. So welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Faye. I'm glad to be here. So
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you here. And if I remember, you're currently based in DC, right? Is that
correct, Washington D.C. Absolutely. It's a great
awesome?
city, even though it's different now that the pandemic's around, but
Mhm.
it's still thriving. It's still strong. It's at the center of everything still.
Mm. Why do you feel like it's at the center of everything? Like what prompted you to move from New York, right?
Yeah. Um, so this this kind of stems back to at the beginning, and I mean, Seth has talked about this before. Many other people have talked about this as well.
Hmm.
Is what you're reading. Um, uh, why are you reading what you're reading, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes it's you're reading things that hopefully are going to change you, right?
Hmm.
And at the same time, I think reading items that no one else is reading helps give you more perspective. So if let's talk, I guess we can talk about what I'm doing now.
Sure.
Um, it I am helping write legislation around artificial intelligence and the automation industry. And my understanding as I've been reading way back when, pre altMBA, was how who's writing legislation and what does it look like. So I'm not going to talk about social justice or religion or anything. We'll stick to kind of the overarching themes here.
Hmm.
But in looking at writing legislation, um, there are some key aspects to being a good legislative writer.
Hmm.
And one would be having kind of an analytical mind, one having a sort of legal, like the traditional legal is like kind of destructive, sort of like destructing
Hmm.
writings. And then the other is like an artist, like being creative. And so that I had to get there, right? On how do I fit and learn these three things? And originally I was a scientist, so I was thinking about it from an analytical mindset. Um, and now I needed to fill in these other pieces, right?
And you went to law school. I mean, you definitely had some very proper training to understand there's a world that I have no access. I mean, I wouldn't say I don't have any access to, but yet admittedly speaking, I know very little about. And I don't even think I have a lot of friends living in DC for that reason. So you're like opening up this, I don't know, Pandora box or otherwise to me on how things actually work over there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I did want to talk about this too, because I hear this a lot where people say, I don't have access to um, the law, or I
Mm,
don't have access to understanding. And I think there is some like crypticness to these power structures.
mm,
And there's this crypticness to the legal world where we're kind of afraid right? Like the notion of like lawyers or anyone that understands the law is that they're going to be super judgmental, but they're also going to be, it's almost like the equivalent of a psychologist sometimes, where you're talking to a psychologist and you're like, okay, you're totally analyzing me right now and all my flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you sit with a lawyer and you're like, okay, how are they analyzing what I'm talking about or what I've written?
Mm.
Did I just break a law and now they're going to judge me
Yeah, what are they
for
writing
what's
down?
right? Exactly. Um, so I think there's a lot going on there. And when I was studying um, with one of my professors at Emory, she decided to write a book around helping the layperson understand and work with the law and lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of times where it's on the onus of you as the individual to kind of be um, to understand what is happening in the legal world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeking help and saying, I need a lawyer or I need someone with more training. And sometimes we just don't know where to go, right? As individuals.
I just noticed like for the first time, and not that this is the first time for us to chat, that there's so much empathy in the way that you communicate because my second question after this would be where you're from originally because look, I'm based, for people who don't know this, I'm based in Boston. And I am a lot of my friends are Jewish, a lot of my friends are from New York, and everybody talks super fast. In fact, a couple of sessions ago, one of my guests, Todd Churches, was so honest. He said, I've been staring at this little turtle my wife gave me and said, slow down when you get interviewed. And yet I feel like, Josh, you're very, you're very, you like to articulate and you're very chill, like very relaxed. And yet you work in DC and you study law. Like, there's some disconnect. What's a disconnect right here?
I mean, that is okay. So
Picking on you.
my family was very much, they were contractors with the military.
Oh,
So this goes back to like, so my dad's a rocket scientist. So that's something that,
no way.
yeah, he's totally a rocket scientist. And we make fun of him a lot of times because he couldn't do things around the house, like simple tasks,
Oh,
right? Like that's the joke where
yeah.
now I'm taller than he is. So there's some of that aspect of being like, hey, can you just do this? Because I can't like reach and it'd be so much easier for you to reach. Um, but then there's that aspect of like, there's only so much in my mind that like I'm thinking about that some tasks just don't work. Um, so there's actually a story that I wanted to tell about that, but I'll come back. So he was contracted by the military. So we moved around a lot in terms of where I lived.
Where were you born,
And
by the way? No.
yeah, so I was only there for a little bit. I was born in Michigan.
Okay.
Um, so I was born in Michigan, but my family is from the Virginia area,
Hmm.
near Air Force Base, the whole like in the military, but not in the military, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
lived in Virginia and then moved to Illinois um, when I was in high school, and then went to school in Arkansas, went to school in Wisconsin,
Right.
kind of like all over, right? So north, south, Midwest, East. So it's kind of a mixture of where I'm at.
Where do you
When
call home? Where do you th
that that is a I think it's complicated. I think
Okay.
I call the world my home. How about
I
that?
like that. Yeah.
Right? I spent like a very short period of time in China, actually. So that was Guangxi,
Oh,
Nanning. Nanning,
You've
Guangxi.
got to be kidding me. No, we did not talk about this last time.
No, we didn't talk about this.
Because that's where my dad's from. I was born and raised in Beijing. My mom's from Beijinger. And my dad, out of all places, I can never explain Guangxi because everybody always knows Guangdong, right? Canton.
Yeah.
And that's where, honestly, a lot of the majority of his family ended up right now. It's what they call home. So my dad is actually from Guangxi and is so passionate about Nanning, Guilin area. And oh my God, this is like so weird. So
um, yeah, so I think, and then a past relationship of mine was from Canada.
mhm,
So we spent a lot of time in Canada. So it's kind of like this mixture of just life.
mhm.
Um, when I was young, and again, I don't want to talk. We'll skip the whole religious talk right now.
Why not?
But
Wait, absolutely.
well,
Yeah, what religious? That's Krista Tiffitt's first question, right? For on being, like, what is your religious origin? Doesn't have to be about going to churches and all that, but it's, you know,
I mean, I guess we could,
what is your
but
religious upbringing? I mean,
yeah. So more of a fundamentalist Christian.
okay.
So I grew up in that lifestyle. I grew up understanding it. Um, and I think I was in first grade when I gave my first sermon that my dad wrote. So that was kind of like an interesting interaction. So
Mm.
speaking was always a part of that.
Oh, interesting.
And
Look at that.
so I remember always being told to slow down, right? So that goes back to the conversation of just slow down and articulate.
Yeah.
And I think that brought me into this sort of teaching. So when I went over to China, then it was this conversation of, okay, you fit all the demographics, right? You're white, you're American, you speak English. So can you teach us something about English? And you're articulating enough that we can hear the pronunciation of English words.
This whole time you just solved all, you see, like the things that people don't end up talking about while going live stream actually answers all the mysterious questions I had because, there are assumptions where meeting you for the first time, I assume that no way you've traveled to China, no way that you have a lot of, you would know a lot of international population because I see you as like, you have this all-American look. So that's just my own assumption, right? And then talking to you like today, I realized I'm like, this guy definitely taught ESL. For those of you guys who don't know that is English as a second language, because you remind me of people that I learned English from, and it was so mega appreciated because when English is your first language, it comes natural. But like for Chinese people, as I'm teaching my mom right now, like she always adds a T or a D after every word because like that just like
Yeah.
yeah. So I said today, I was like, Mom, how do you say is done eating? She's like, done eating, done. I'm like, no, there's no D or T, just done eating. And so it's fascinating. So you taught English in China
Yes, yes.
for a year?
Uh, well, and I think now it turned into this global pandemic,
Mm,
right? Came around, and then there's like this shift of can you teach a little bit online,
mm.
and how does that work?
For
And
you?
so, well, I mean, also, I mean, I think Wi-Fi or connectivity is
Mm,
an issue and that goes to kind of like what I'm doing here in DC
mm,
of how many people in rural areas do not have access to internet,
mm.
right? And that is also in the United States as well as over in China, right? Where the connectivity is so hard, but it's so needed when everyone's stuck in their home.
Yeah, I must ask, out of all the places people normally, like normal people choose to go to, we're talking about like Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai, Canton. How did you end up in Guangxi? Like how do you even find that program? Like why that place?
Yeah, so I was in North Carolina. University of North Carolina has a really good relationship with English sort of scholars
Mm,
in China, and a teacher that did 6 months in the United States and 6 months at Guangxi University,
Mm.
I connected with her, and we just kind of like, it turned into a new program that they were building, and then other people kind of joined. So it
Wow.
was all by accident. Like everything is by accident. I think you just have to keep your mind open, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
we did go to Guilin, and that was interesting too. Um, that it's a beautiful place,
Yeah,
right?
but it's
And
very
the
rural. Like,
yeah, I also stayed on the top of a rice mountain, rice field
oh wow.
in Laosheng. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, if I said that right, it's been 3 years now, so
I was gonna say it's only been 3 years. I was thinking like, is this? Oh, okay. Did you like? I was gonna say, when did you graduate from college? I had assumed that this was like a part of a college experience or outside of college.
yeah, so it was only for at the end of a summer,
Okay.
and it was like kind of like an 21-day sort of trip.
Okay.
But uh, it was an experience. I mean, an experience that I wanted to do, and so I had those 3 weeks
Yeah.
and um, said, "Yeah, let's give it a go."
Wow. Oh,
Everyone
that's
says I look young, so I wonder
no, no.
how
I don't.
how young I look.
No, no, this like I'm losing like as I'm getting older, I'm losing track of the timeline altogether because we are, I mean like seriously, don't I'm trying to do the math. This is so embarrassing, sorry. We're in 2020. So if you were in China 3 years ago, you graduated in 2017, 16?
No, it was in the middle of my
Uh,
life.
oh, okay,
So
okay.
I'm gonna be 36 this year.
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
cool, cool. We're
I'm gonna be 36 this year. So
That's a great age, by the way. Wonderful. I
I,
was there
I
last year,
love
I
I
can tell
love
you.
my 30s.
Yeah.
um,
Sorry for derailing you, but this is fascinating. I don't know what it is, but to discover people's journey just shocks my system to no end. And it really does, like in the most unexpected ways. And there's a sense of connection, right, that you'll have with someone if you didn't find out about this. I mean, like, I admit that recently I interviewed BJ Miller, who's a palliative care doctor, and my mom was so inspired, who ended up painting a painting of him, and oh my God, it's just unbelievable, astonishing. And she had this vision. Neither one of us really can say that we know him very well. My mom had this vision one day. She's like, I think Dr. Miller is very into ancient Chinese paintings and techniques. Like, no, 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 mom, no, I don't think so. And she's like, well, I saw a painting in his house in one of the videos you shared with me. Like, no, that's Zen Hospice Center. That's not really his home. So I don't think he really cares or knows much about this. And of course, 5 minutes later, that same day or something, I listened to his podcast with Krista Tippett from On Being. He's like, yeah, I almost went to China to study for a semester. I learned Chinese, Mandarin Chinese for a year in school and art. I'm just like, what is this? What kind of vision is this? So I'm learning similar things about you, which is awesome.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think just world, since we're so globally connected, um, there's so much to learn from different cultures,
Hmm.
and the diversity helps bring out, I think, the best in people. I mean,
Mm.
that's how I've always looked at it. A lot of other people would say, if we did talk about race, right? I grew up in Virginia, where my father is from. He was a minority in this place called Hampton, Virginia. No one ever
Mm.
knows where it is, but there's this university called Hampton University, which is a historically black college,
Mm.
right? And so I remember growing up in Virginia and being one of the only white kids, right,
Wow.
in school.
Mm.
And then when we moved to Illinois, there was one black kid in my high school.
Mm.
So it was like this weird like shift in cultures. And so like when you're young, I don't think you like, you don't, I had never thought about it.
Mm.
And I didn't really think about it until I went to college and then, going to a university. And then it just started like the more you read and the more you interacted, things started to come up. Um,
Do you?
but good.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, you're really young when this was happening for you to realize that and later remember it today. I'm curious, because I had experienced that more or less since I would say 17, a little bit periodically when I was younger, because my parents had a lot of friends in Europe and in America. They would travel over, but I always knew that was temporary. That wasn't really integrated into part of my life to see kids of different skin color origins. Most of the kids, obviously, I interacted with were Chinese, but for you to experience that in elementary school, middle school, um, I mean, what are some of the senses you had at the time? And I wonder how it maybe impacts your life today, interacting to be actually living a hodgepodge, right? There's everyone, every culture. Do you think it helps for you to adapt in a conversation with friends of many different origins? Because I know some people are a little bit afraid of it or feel really uncomfortable, and they're honest enough to admit that to me.
Yeah. Can you rephrase
Sure,
that?
sure, of course.
This is
Yeah,
good.
my questions tend to sometimes run a little long with multiple questions built in. Don't do that. So I wonder, maybe it's one question. I'll build it up a little bit. I went to high school in Freiburg, Maine, where we were the only Asian kids out of, I mean, like miles and miles, right? Like we were seven Chinese kids in a private school. But then I realized one of my teachers, Tracy Trider, really took us in. And her kids, who are still friends with me, Chelsea and Miles, these kids were all the same age, but they were surrounded by us every single year. And in fact, I didn't realize later on it had been happening to my friend Chelsea her whole life. Her parents always brought kids over to the house,
Hmm.
kids from all countries. At one point, she thought herself as a Chinese person. She's blonde, very blonde. And so that I just thought it was so fascinating to me that later on, I see these kids, my friends, to be very accepting and very comfortable in an environment where there are people of different colors, ethnicities, origins, and cultures. So I wonder, maybe you've had a similar experience because you were exposed to that culture a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that does help. Um,
Mm,
I so Harvard has this implicit bias. I'm gonna take a different spin. They have this implicit bias project that they
mm,
have online. You can take these exams, right? And it's a bunch of different things, right? So you can think I think one is like Muslim and Arab, one
mm,
is police, one is white, black, um, uh, lesbian, gay, trans, like all these sort of
mm,
tests. And I think if you take those, you can see some of these implicit and like deep rooted thoughts
mm,
that would come out. And I think the more that you're exposed, I have found in taking the tests, right, the language and the exposure
mm,
really changes how I view people. And I'll be one to admit that certain things where people would say, oh, well, he's white, so he probably has these sorts of things, like thinking about, are wrong,
mm,
where it's sometimes the opposite, right? Where it would be things I'm not exposed to when I was younger or I read about in a particular way
mm,
that have changed my viewpoint.
mm,
So, for example, I'm still learning more about Middle Eastern culture, where one of my sisters lived in the Middle East for 2 years, right? And she has a completely different perspective than I do, where she was a lot younger than I was. So, living in a historically black college neighborhood
Mhm.
has, and I'm not going to speak for what her perceptions are, but I think they're going to be different than mine in how we grew up.
Mhm.
So I think being exposed to to the diversity from a rich, poor, this country, that country really puts in a new perspective on how you look at things and how you
Mhm.
grow up.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You have such an analytical mind. I would love to take that assessment or a test myself. Years ago, people said there was. I remember there was one test when I was in college, like it would be early 2000, mid 2000, and I remember it says, "Faye, you're definitely gonna fail this. Like you have to choose." Out of all the Asian people pictures, which is like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and I failed miserably. So um, that is way less sophisticated than what you're describing. But at the same time, I think it's interesting. At this part, I don't think that people probably know much about you. And I know we're stepping into a territory that's can be sensitive. And that's something, I don't typically talk about religion or politics on the show because everybody tends to have a different opinion and tends to convey you or trying to convince you in one form or another. But it's fascinating through my own experience. I always tell people, except for us, we're in the pandemic, that if you're 20 years old and you don't speak the language, go to that country and try to really live, trying to survive, make friends. And you're going to see and learn so much more about these people that you've never learned on TV, in the books. And it will be often completely the opposite and counterintuitive than what you thought you're dealing with. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean the interaction that I've had with how um, people view the United States through movies
Mhm.
or through television, right?
Yeah.
And then they come over and say you're put in the middle of the country,
Yeah.
right? Because DC isn't really really well thought of. Maybe Chicago and a little less, LA and New York, like everybody thinks, okay, New York, LA, this is what it is.
America, yeah.
Um, yeah, that's America. And I had a friend from Turkey who, when she came over to the United States, she got a job in Honolulu, Hawaii,
Hmm.
right? And was like, hey, I'm going to America, right? And everyone in America was like, you're not going to America, you're going to Hawaii, right? Like it's a completely different place
Yeah.
than a rural part of the United States. But I think it's also like the United States is so vast that you're going to find
Hmm.
different perspectives from the east to the west, regional aspects, and then the north and the south, obviously
Hmm.
the same. So, um, but since we're on the topic, we can totally talk about
Yeah, go for it.
these things. Um, where do you want to start? I mean, we got.
Yeah. How much time we got left?
I think for me, like
Mhm.
problem solving. So I was thinking about you had kind of pitched the idea of what's not on paper is the
Mhm.
best part of me.
Mhm.
So I was talking to I've been talking to a lot of people about what are the aspects that they find in me, those that really know me,
Mhm.
um, that are valuable. Like,
Mhm.
well, why are you friends with me?
Great
But
question.
they, and I think the thought comes about caring, right? And sticking up for my people. And I think if you really want to focus on um, problem solving,
Mhm.
then we have to be able to disagree
Mhm.
and have those conversations of disagreement. And I think I've always been brought up where if you want to have a conversation, then you need to be level headed, you need to be stable.
Mhm.
I think you've talked about this on your podcast before in terms of negotiations, right? Like
Mhm.
if it's a fighting sort of battle,
Hmm.
then you're not going to get anywhere,
Yeah.
right? You're not going to work well with anybody. I've always thought about negotiations is more of like human interaction.
Hmm.
So if you act as a human to someone else, then you're probably going to be able to problem solve, and you don't have to agree 100% of the time.
That's
So,
interesting, right? Like I think that's the problem that we're facing right now, big and small. I mean, even not just the overarching politics that we're all facing and living with, but also like inside small households, like people, maybe that's why partners don't get along really well. How do you how do you find some of the skills that you've leveraged or even changing the tone of voice or taking a different perspective to resolve something more quickly, peacefully, will agree to disagree? Like, what's that process like for you?
so I get the two things. I think I still work on that with my personal, say, significant other,
Hmm.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's a relationship, because it is very, both of us are very strong-willed
Hmm.
individuals,
Hmm.
but we care so much, right? So we
Hmm.
care about the topic, and we know um, how each other is going to interact.
Yeah.
And but so in that regard, now it is, hey, we're being more open and communicating to the fact of, I don't like your tone, I feel this tone, and
Hmm.
just saying it, like calling it out, like, here's the tone that I'm getting from you.
Hmm.
No, we're not going to go far if, because
Yeah.
I'm going to start to have that tone, you're going to have that tone, we're not going far.
Right.
um, so I think that in terms of household or, significant other, there's calling those things out. In
Hmm.
other people, I think it's trying to um, I mean, I think it goes back to, I think you've talked about this before, mirroring and validating. Like, these are
Hmm.
concepts that we just have to continually work on.
Hmm.
This is what I heard, right? I'm trying to understand. Or is there a way that you can convey, I heard this, and this is how I'm approaching it.
Hmm.
Uh, is this how I should be approaching it? Um, I think slowing down, again, I think even when you talk,
Hmm.
slowing down and understanding and conveying how you're approaching things is so much more effective than just jumping in to um, what assertion you're going to make based on some thought that you're having or narrative that you've accumulated in your mind. And now you're going to project that onto someone else.
As you're describing that, I find myself gonna really find it challenging to start an argument with you, even if I wanted to. I think it's just, like there's a sense of that escalation, right? So, I've been in conversation situations where I I definitely talk on the faster side. And I was one day telling my dentist, I'm pretty chill, I'm pretty relaxed. I don't get, he's like, yeah, yeah, that's all true, but you're intense. Like, just like me, you're intense. So, if you're with somebody else just as intense or as caring as you are for certain subjects, I can definitely see the point of escalation. You're like, you're shouting louder. Yeah, very quickly it will be at a boiling point. So I'm curious because you do have a very successful career, and people are going to click on those links and learn more about Josh. I'm excited for them to do that. You do a lot of very big boy stuff like the AI, AI association. That's artificial intelligence, I assume, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are pretty serious things. I would love to, and I apologize for kind of directing you to talk about all your origin stories and childhood memories. I love to learn, more about what you do. And I'm also very curious in terms of what you have learned, what we have learned from Seth Godin's altMBA that has been very applicable or helpful to your work life.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is great because I love talking about these sorts of things, right? And I think from altMBA and Seth Godin, I think there's this, we talked about this just recently, what, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, about
Mm-hmm.
trusting yourself,
Mm,
right? Another sponsor of mine, that's a whole different conversation of sponsor versus mentor, right?
mm-hmm.
Would say, he said, we were co-writing a piece together, and he goes, stop writing like a researcher, stop writing like
Mm,
you don't know, like
mm,
write with the authority that you have. And I remember from the altMBA and Seth Godin is kind of like, make the assertion, like you're a professional,
mm,
um, lead, right?
mm,
Like that's the thing, is like lead. It needs to happen, so make it happen.
mm-hmm.
Um, and see what comes from it. So I think that's my thing from the altMBA was, you have to trust yourself,
Mm.
and you are the professional. You have to see yourself as a professional in order for other people to view you as a professional.
True. Yeah. I mean that's such a great topic, right? Trusting yourself. And sometimes when we step back to look at these ultra wisdom coming from Seth Godins and the Seth Godins of the world, and you're like, wow, that is kind of apparent. Like, if I don't trust myself, who am I supposed to trust? Like, parents, I mean, we're adults, but at the same time, I definitely also find myself developing, there's a workshop I'm doing for podcasters and virtual assistants, and I'm inviting Chris Voss to join me in a webinar. There's part of me to say, like, oh, putting something out there and to measure our success or how much we should trust ourselves based on social shares, comments, how many people attend the event, conversion, all these things can be really daunting. And so like, do you look at those stats? How do you kind of balance trusting yourself versus looking at vanity metrics and ignoring them?
Yeah, for me, I just dive in
Mhm.
and go from there, right? I think a part of it was, so for the AI Association, for example, there was um, no association that was representing sort of businesses on the overall national strategic plan for what is artificial intelligence and what is automation,
Mhm.
in the United States.
Mhm.
So there's no plan where the rest of the world has a plan.
Mm.
And there were so many businesses that were saying, well, and this kind of goes to, in understanding law and legislation and the economy, was the government in conjunction to the, like, it helps grow the market. So the regulations behind certain things or the laws behind certain things help grow businesses, especially on something as sensitive as, say, algorithms or data privacy or
Mhm.
whatever. And the United States at this point has said, well, we don't really have a plan.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's kind of the approach was, okay, so many clients or people that I'm interacting with are going, hey, I'm in this field, but you're in this field, and what a trade association are you with? And we all were like, well, there's not a trade association, so let's just create it, right? Like, if no one's going to create it, we should create it because we see the value in it and what they are.
Mhm.
And so from that, just things kind of like you write by accident and then it turns into something.
Mhm.
So from there, then it turned into universities. Students were going, well, we're not getting taught this. And you're the only group that's actually like trying to teach lawmakers about what artificial intelligence is and what automation is and what that all looks like. Can you help us?
Mhm.
Right. So like all that's kind of how this world transpired. And I think the challenge And this is another thing from the altMBA is lawmakers were confused on how Facebook, I think everybody remembers this, how Facebook makes money,
Mm,
right? And they couldn't understand. So trying to package it in a way that anybody can understand from any worldview and any perspective um, definitely helped from the altMBA.
hmm Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating that all of us who join altMBA and came from so many walks of life, and it's as a result, I think I've learned that in a way that being a variety show isn't so bad, right? Like I bring a lot of different people from different disciplines on the show, definitely received a lot of criticism as well, as in, why can't you just interview doctors, just interview digital marketers? And then, so yeah, it's actually a lot easier to market that show, but that's not really the reason why I started that. And as a result, I think through altMBA, meeting you and learning now about AI association is where else am I going to learn all these different multidisciplinary topics? Like if I don't know these people and instead just kind of be in a safe place where I'm talking to all the digital marketers who speak the same language and have the same arguments, complaints about everything. So you mentioned that you mentioned teaching because you're also an adjunct professor right now. And by the way, like, do you enjoy the experience so far? And like, what have you, how does it make you feel? Because I feel like it's a really big deal. We're close, we're pretty similar in age. And, now you're this professor teaching people, I don't know, like 10 years younger, but you're, seen as like this authority, as an authority
Yeah.
in certain topics.
Yeah. I love it. I
Mm.
love teaching at that level. And I am waiting to hear back on maybe having another appointment at a different university.
Oh, wonderful.
So I won't, it's not official yet, but the students were asking. So that makes me feel good. Um, I think also seeing the evaluations, um, like is kind of that's the vanity metrics, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
But I think seeing the growth from the beginning to the end,
Mhm.
and being able to package it in a certain way is super helpful, I think, outside of teaching. But I love the thought of teaching people how to learn. I've always approached it this way is can you learn something and grow later when I'm gone?
Mm,
That's something I didn't get a
mhm,
lot when, I mean, I can think of one professor in particular, and there were other professors too, but one in particular that was very much invested in
mm.
you gaining the tools to learn later when I'm not around,
Yeah.
the more the material. And so I've really approached it that way of saying, okay, I'm going to give you some of these building blocks,
Hmm.
but I really want to teach you how to think for yourself and get excited about it. And I think it also depends on the audience, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of these students don't know the fundamentals, but they're also not excited.
Mm.
And I interviewed, do you know Don Norman?
No, don't
So
know.
way back in the day, interviewed Don Norman for this book group. Um, he wrote a design book on the design of everyday things.
Oh,
One of
okay.
like anyway, we were talking about education at one point, and he talked about um, if you start
Mm.
with excitement, you start with curiosity, and then you work back to like building a project, then fundamentals, and then you get to history. And
Mm.
we've always gone the other way where we say history first, then we go to fundamentals, then we go to a project, and then we go to excitement,
Mm.
right? And I
Mm.
think that's still pretty much the case where we're like, hey, we're going to teach you statistics, we're going to teach you the history of statistics, and then we're going to build a project
That
after you learn all of
that is
this.
fascinating. That's why everybody hates school. I mean, not everybody, but that's why it's so you got to convince little kids from when you're so little till you're an adult, that exact same, format, the industrial design you just described, like why not build the excitement first?
Right. And so I've
Mhm.
approached that with undergraduate students where they're still like they're in this mixture of, well, we're excited about business, we're excited about um, building a business, and I know like a fundamental is law. So how do we build projects?
Mhm.
Right. So they're not to the fundamental stage because they're just a little bit excited, but can we build projects and then kind of slowly add in the fundamentals
Mm.
to
It's so.
then
Mhm.
get them, okay, so now I'm excited. Now I'm building a project. Okay, I see the value of learning the fundamentals. And then at the end of the class, everyone, well, not everyone, right? You have the outliers, but say the majority are going, okay, I want to learn more. Do I have enough of the skills of building the project to then get into more of the fundamentals and learning on my own, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're only doing it for 7 weeks or 14 weeks. That's not a lot of time to say, okay, let's learn about all aspects of law, right?
Yeah. And I think this is so applicable to people who are thinking or considering about entrepreneurship. I think that is at the heart of it, like everything you just described. Because I think for me, since the age of 22, outside of college, so much what I do every day, whether it's full time, but especially since I became an entrepreneur in 2016, is about rethinking how to learn and how to discover new possibilities and so much still like yesterday till today, it's not about learning or applying everything I already know, looking through dictionaries and, process books, but just to figure out like just stay a few steps ahead, especially in industries that are new to me. So I love what you're sharing. And I do think like Seth Godin and a lot of our mentors really is about. And this gentleman, now I recognize the book with a red pot, like a teapot. Yes, I've heard of this book from Don Norman. Is about teaching people how to think and then how to learn. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about that book, I think, is some of and one aspect of it is a door, right? Just look at the doors that you see and how they're designed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes you go to a door and then they put a sign that says push or pull.
Mm-hmm.
And he's basically saying, why don't we design a door where you don't have to you shouldn't have to put up a sign to
Mm-hmm.
say push or pull. The person should know like how to get in and out of the door without a sign, right? So if there's like a big bar, right,
Mm-hmm.
on this side, am I pushing or pulling that big bar,
Mm-hmm.
right? And normally, like your intuition is to pull it, right? There's the
Yeah.
bar, I pull. If there's like a little push thing,
Mm-hmm.
then that means push,
Yeah.
right? Push and pull. But sometimes it's the other way, where it's the bar and you have to push it.
Push. Yeah.
But you're pulling, right? You're like, why isn't this opening? Like I'm trying to pull it, but it's actually push.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sees a lot of those. Like I even think like the teacup in there might on that book might be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why a mug is a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you wouldn't put a spout right here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Um,
right. I'm looking at it right now. I was like, I don't get it. Oh, now I do. Yeah. It's
right? Because it's just about intuition.
And I think what you're also describing is challenging the system that we're already so familiar with, that we've lived with, our parents have lived with for so long. And, I not to say people say don't reinvent the wheel, but I think a lot of our everyday life and even belief systems do need some reinvention. To me, that is just the most fascinating things out there. Again, like for example, I reference and I hear these conversations all the time. As my mom's painting Dr. B.J. Miller, I'm hearing her playing our conversation in the background, and I picked up certain things such as like not just cancer patients, people with serious illness. Their first question is, "Can I still have sex?" Right? And then it's really interesting. People's uh, fundamental understanding of sex is just one thing, but you often neglect the fact that it is intimacy. It's so much bigger than that. You need a bigger framework to understand how to solve for the problems. Like we human are so creative, can be very generative. And why are people only thinking about sex in terms of intercourse? That's it. And it's so fascinating to me to realize like, for us, like looking at the teapot, the door, how to have sex, how to build a, long-standing and healthy relationship with a partner. And I think we're kind of all talking about the same thing here. And yeah, that's what I've been thinking about lately a lot.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
human interaction, right? Like,
Mm,
what do you want out of it? I was asked recently, so right now there's this big movement protest happening
mm,
in Washington, D.C. and around the country. So, Carthage College, where
mm,
I teach, is in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is all over the news, right? And
mm,
there's so many conversations happening uh, in that area. And the conversation is, are you out there on the streets getting really angry,
mm,
right? And I think it's not productive to just be so angry that you're not, because then you don't listen. Um, do am I judging those that are getting really angry? No, right? That's not productive either.
mhm,
Um, but the strategy I think we all have to think about, what do we want from this? And I
mm,
think having more conversations and getting more perspective, because if two people are yelling at each other, they're not hearing the other person.
mhm,
That's where all of this collides, right? If I was a teacher and my students and I was just yelling at them,
mm,
then they're not going to learn and they're not going to gain anything. And if they were just yelling at me,
mhm,
then there's no, human interaction. Same goes with our personal relationships.
mhm.
And I think me, if I was yelling at you, right, that you would say, well, he's never coming on my podcast again,
Yeah.
or I didn't learn anything, right? Like all of this is about human interaction. And
Mm,
until we inter- interact as humans, then it's really, really difficult
mhm.
to get your point across or hear the other person's perspective.
Yeah. And I've comfortably used up your entire hour, and I do like how we, ended up talking about really love, especially some of these final like discoveries, some points. And I just want to say that sometimes it's so easy for most people to think about what's in it for me. Like, what's if, like I must be either I'm happy or making money, the rest I don't, I get that mentality. And especially during COVID, right? With PUA, PPP, everybody is like, they need this every whatever amount of dollars they can get, something concrete they can look at and count on. But at the same time, I think what I learned from you, from Seth Godin's altMBA, is we can all level up. That by sharing this idea, by collaborating, by going live together, it's better for both of us. And even if I can't concretely count on, whatever may come out of it, I hope people reach out to you. I know a lot of people who have joined in conversations with me have reached out to me and my guests. And then that is just amazing. But even if that's not happening, sometimes you still have to convince yourself and know that you are making an impact. You are doing something beyond yourself or your close circle in the community. So I love how you're describing these things. Very inspiring to me as well.
Well, thanks, Faye. I mean, I'm honored to be on your podcast because you've had so many great guests
Thank you.
on this podcast, and you're bringing me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I know that sometimes like people see these names, Sarah Cooper just took off like crazy, right? She's, talking to the I almost said future president, to be president, VP, and she's got her Netflix show. But I think I was literally thinking about the other day that she was this normal, she's very talented, she's always been, but she was this normal, humble person. She still is today, that people don't realize that what we possess and what we can become without the vanity metrics. So, you're just as, Josh, you're just as special as everybody else, and in many aspects, you are offering more than some of them could. So, yeah, definitely trust our instinct, trust ourselves. If you don't take away anything else, that's it. You got to trust yourself.
Exactly. Trust yourself. So, well, thanks. I appreciate it. Um,
Yeah. Let's have an awkward ending. So we're gonna go offline now. We're gonna stop live stream. Don't miss us too much. Check out Josh. Check out my calendar event and whoever. I mean, oh, Chris Voss is bringing his entire team to join me on a webinar. You can find out more at feisworld.com/events. So